Log entry 23. Arthur Fisher Field Survey record. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site initial inspection began at 6:40. The Watchman Tower stood exactly where the map indicated, though the road that should have led to it had almost entirely vanished beneath grass and dusty layers of pale soil. The structure appears older than the records state. Timber joints warped, iron bolts heavily oxidized. My purpose here is to determine whether the tower can be restored as a functional signal station. Environmental conditions: wind minimal, sky overcast, light diffusion poor, sound travels unusually far across the valley. I can hear the forest, even when standing beside the tower wall. There is also a cat. Black fur, medium build. It emerged from beneath the collapsed supply shed shortly after I arrived. No collar, but unusually calm around humans. It watches me constantly. When I move equipment, it follows at a measured distance of roughly 2 meters, possibly feral but conditioned to human presence. Interior tower inspection began at 7:15. The stairwell spirals upward for 4 levels. Structural integrity uncertain, but passable. Dust accumulation suggests decades without maintenance. Yet there are disturbances along the steps, narrow streaks through the dusty coating, as if something drags across the wood repeatedly. Not footprints, parallel marks. I documented them and continued. Level 2 contains what should have been the Watchman quarters. Bed frame collapsed, lantern rusted through. However, the desk remains intact. Inside the drawer I discovered several notebooks belonging to the former watchman assigned here in the 1970s. Pages brittle but readable. Most entries discuss routine signal checks. The final entries are irregular. The writing becomes compressed. Repetitive references to movement beyond the tree line. Mentions of figures standing where the fog gathers. No further technical descriptions. At approximately 8:05 I experienced the first anomaly. While cataloguing the desk, the cat entered the tower interior. This is noteworthy because the door remained closed. I had personally secured it due to wind pressure, yet the animal appeared silently beside the stairwell and began staring upward toward level 3. It produced a low, continuous sound. Not a hiss, not a growl, a warning. I ascended to investigate. Level 3 should contain the signal lantern housing. Instead, I found a secondary door not present in the architectural diagrams. The wood is older than the tower itself. Different grain pattern, different nails. Carved into the surface are repeated symbols resembling crude trees or antlers. While documenting the carvings, I heard footsteps above me. Important clarification: the tower only has 4 levels. I was on the 3rd. The 4th level should be open air. The footsteps continued for approximately 12 seconds. The cat fled immediately afterward. Log entry 24. Arthur Fisher Field Survey continuation. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 910. I remained on level 3 for several minutes after the footsteps ceased. No further sound detected above. Wind direction unchanged. Structural vibrations minimal. The phenomenon cannot be easily attributed to loose timber expansion or wildlife movement. I ascended to level 4. According to engineering diagrams, the upper platform should consist of an open observation deck used by the watchman to monitor signal fires along the valley line. The structure does match this description in part: circular railing, lantern frame mount, and the remnants of an iron pulley system. However, there are additions. Several wooden posts have been driven directly into the platform floor. They are not part of the tower. As construction, the wood is darker and significantly older than the rest of the structure. The posts form a crude circle roughly 2 meters in diameter. Between them lie small piles of dusty earth. The arrangement resembles ritual placement rather than structural reinforcement. No footprints are visible in the dust. This is notable because the surface layer is thick enough to record any recent activity. My own boot prints are clearly defined near the stairwell, yet the circle remains undisturbed. At 9:18 the cat returned. It emerged from the stairwell slowly, body low, ears angled backward. It approached the perimeter of the wooden posts but refused to enter the circle. Instead, it paced along the outer edge repeatedly, maintaining a constant radius from the center. Behavior suggests territorial awareness or fear conditioning. While observing the animal, I noticed carvings on the interior faces of the posts. The same symbols present on the door below, branching lines resembling antlers or trees stripped of leaves. There are 22 posts. One position in the circle is empty. At approximately 9:24, the environment changed abruptly. Wind increased across the ridge, though the surrounding forest remained still. The dusty piles inside the circle began shifting slightly despite the lack of direct airflow. Simultaneously, the cat fixed its gaze on the empty position between the posts. I followed its line of sight. For several seconds, nothing occurred. Then the dust in that space compressed, not scattered. Compressed downward as if weight had been placed upon it, I approached cautiously to examine the disturbance. The depression resembles the impression of a human foot, though longer and significantly narrower than normal proportions. While documenting the mark, I heard the footsteps again. This time they came from the stairwell behind me. Ascending. Slow, measured. The cat reacted immediately. It backed away from the circle, fur raised, eyes locked on the stair opening. There is only one access point to this level, and I was already standing on it. Log entry 25. Arthur Fisher Structural Survey Continuation, Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 931. The footsteps stopped before reaching the platform. Sound characteristics, heavy but controlled. Weight distribution inconsistent with standard human gait. Each step carried a slight delay afterward, as if pressure remained on the wood longer than expected. I positioned myself beside the stairwell opening to establish visual confirmation. No subject appeared. The staircase below was empty. I waited approximately 40 seconds. During this period, the tower produced intermittent creaking typical of wind stress, though the forest beyond the ridge remained largely motionless. The cat maintained eye contact with the stairwell the entire time. It did not blink. At 9:33, I began descending to level 3 for verification. Halfway down the spiral staircase, I observed new disturbances in the dusty coating along the steps. These were not present earlier during my ascent. The marks are elongated and narrow, similar to the impressions seen inside the circle above. They begin halfway up the staircase, not at the bottom. The first impression appears directly on the step where I paused earlier while examining the door carvings. From that point, the prints continue upward toward level 4. There are 13 visible impressions, each step spaced evenly, each aligned toward the platform. No corresponding prints lead downward. The cat refused to descend past level 4. It remained above, emitting a low vibration through its throat. I completed the inspection of level 3 at 9:41. The secondary door remains closed. Carvings unchanged. However, the surface dusty layer around the threshold now contains additional disturbances. Thin lines etched through the dust form branching patterns, similar to the carved symbols. These lines were not present during my previous documentation. Upon closer inspection, they appear freshly traced. Tool marks absent. The dust itself seems to have shifted into the shapes. At 9:46, I attempted to open the door. Resistance encountered. The hinges are operational, but there is significant pressure from the opposite side, as if weight is resting against the interior surface. The wood flexed slightly under force, but did not open beyond 2 centimeters. Through the gap I observed darkness. No interior light reflection, no detectable movement. At 9:48, the cat abruptly fled down the staircase past me, claws striking the wood with unusual force. It exited the tower immediately. This reaction corresponded with a new sound. Not footsteps, breathing, slow inhalation from the other side of the door. The exhale followed several seconds later. The air passing through the narrow opening carried a strong odor of damp soil and dusty wood decay. During the third breath cycle, the door shifted outward slightly under internal pressure. The gap widened enough for me to see the floor inside. The interior ground is covered with soil, not floorboards, packed earth. And embedded in that soil are multiple long footprints facing the door. All of them appear to be waiting. Log entry 26. Arthur Fisher Containment Assessment. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 955. I terminated the attempt to open the secondary door. Structural resistance remains significant, and the unknown mass on the opposite side presents unacceptable risk. Door gap returned to its original position after pressure ceased. However, the breathing continued for several minutes. Air displacement pattern suggests lung capacity larger than typical human physiology. Estimated inhalation volume significantly higher than standard respiratory rates. Each breath carries particulate matter through the door seam, increasing dusty accumulation along the threshold. At 9:58, the breathing stopped. Silence followed. I remained stationary beside the door for approximately 2 minutes to monitor for additional movement, none detected. At 10:01, I began descending to level 2 to review the Watchman notebooks for any historical references to this structural anomaly. The stairwell environment had changed. The elongated footprints previously observed ascending the staircase had multiplied. New impressions now appear between my own boot prints, crossing them at irregular angles. They do not follow a continuous path. Instead, they form loose circular patterns along the steps, as if something paced there repeatedly. By the time I reached level 2, the dusty layer on the floor of the quarters had also been disturbed. My equipment bag remained untouched, but the surrounding dust shows wide sweeping arcs, similar to the patterns on the stairs. Possible explanation, air currents caused by tower ventilation. However, the windows remain sealed and wind velocity outside is minimal. While examining the desk again, I discovered an additional page inside the Watchman's final notebook entry that I had not previously noticed. The page had adhered to the back cover. The handwriting is significantly less stable than earlier entries. The text reads as follows: Day 23. They stand in the trees at night, but come closer when the tower sleeps. The circle above keeps them outside. 20. 3 posts must remain. Never remove one. This statement conflicts with current observations. There are only 22 posts on the platform. At 10:07 a sound occurred above me. Wood cracking, not gradual stress. A single sharp fracture. I ascended immediately. Level 3 door now stands partially open, gap width approximately 20 centimeters. The packed soil floor inside is visible without obstruction. Multiple footprints lead from the interior chamber directly to the doorway. They stop at the threshold. Just before crossing onto the wooden floor, on the inside wall of the chamber, carved into the earth itself, are the same branching symbols seen on the door and posts. But here they form a much larger pattern. A circle inside that circle are 20, 2 depressions in the soil, identical in shape to the wooden posts above. Which means the chamber below once held the same number, 20. 3. While documenting the formation, the cat reappeared at the base of the stairwell. It stared directly at the open door, then slowly turned its head upward toward level 4. A new sound followed, a wooden post sliding across the platform floor. Log entry 27. Arthur Fisher Structural Integrity Review. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 1012. I ascended immediately to level 4 following the sound of displaced timber. Environmental conditions unchanged, wind irregular but weak, sky still heavily overcast. The cat followed several steps behind me on the staircase, but stopped at level 3 again, refusing to continue upward. Upon reaching the platform, I confirmed that one of the wooden posts from the circle had moved. The displacement distance measures approximately 40 centimeters inward toward the center. The base of the post has been dragged through the dusty surface layer, leaving a clear trail in the soil. No tool marks, no secondary footprints. The remaining 21 posts maintain their original positions. The empty space in the circle is no longer empty. Dust within that position has been disturbed again. The narrow footprint I documented earlier is deeper now, the soil compacted as though greater weight had settled there. While examining the post, I noticed additional carvings on the inner surface that were not visible from the outer ring. The symbols resemble the branching antler shapes seen previously, but here they extend downward in long parallel lines, roots or veins. Each post contains a different variation of the pattern. At 10:16, I inspected the underside of the displaced post. The base is sharpened to a crude point, suggesting it had originally been driven into the platform flooring deliberately rather than simply placed there. This supports the Watchman's written warning regarding the required number of posts. 23. The cat produced a sharp cry from below at this moment. I approached the stairwell to observe. The animal stood rigid at level 3, facing the open chamber door. Its back fur fully raised, tail expanded. It then turned and looked directly at me. Immediately after, the tower experienced a vertical vibration similar to sudden weight redistribution. One of the posts behind me shifted again. I turned to observe the circle. 2 posts had now moved inward, both sliding slowly across the dusty platform floor toward the center. The movement occurred without sound except for faint friction against the wood. Estimated rate approximately 1 centimeter every 2 seconds. This continued for 15 seconds before stopping. The circle is shrinking. The depression in the center deepened further during this movement, as if something occupying that position were adjusting its stance. While documenting the distances between the posts, I became aware of another anomaly. The forest surrounding the tower has become completely silent. No wind movement in the trees, no birds, no insects. At 10:20, I heard footsteps again. Not from the stairwell, from inside the circle. 1 step. Then another. The dusty surface compressed where no visible object stood, and the shifting posts began slowly leaning inward, as though something tall at the center had just straightened to its full height. Log entry 28. Arthur Fisher Containment Failure Assessment, Northern Ridge Maintenance Site, 1023. The posts remain angled inward toward the center of the platform circle. Their tilt appears uniform, suggesting external pressure rather than structural weakness. Estimated force vector, inward, downward, originating from the central depression. No visible subject present. However, the dusty surface continues compressing in several sequential points, forming a narrow path between the posts. The pattern resembles slow walking. I stepped backward toward the stairwell, opening to maintain line of sight observation of the circle perimeter. At this moment, the displaced post stopped moving. The depression at the center expanded. Not outward, downward. Soil and dust sank gradually into a deeper cavity, as if the platform floor beneath had softened or partially collapsed. Yet the wood structure remains intact under manual pressure. The phenomenon appears localized only within the circle. At 10:24, a new footprint formed just outside the circle boundary. This is the first confirmed instance of movement beyond the posts. The indentation appeared slowly, beginning with a faint surface ripple before the dusty layer compressed under weight. Dimensions match the previous elongated prints observed in the stairwell, and chamber length estimate, approximately 40 centimeters. The cat reacted instantly from below. It emitted a prolonged howl unlike its earlier warning sounds. The tone carried upward through the tower with surprising resonance, producing faint echoes through the stairwell. Simultaneously, the interior chamber door on level 3 slammed fully open. The sound traveled upward through the structure. Several seconds later, a low vibration passed through the platform floor beneath my boots. This vibration repeated 3 times, evenly spaced. Possible explanation: impacts occurring inside the soil chamber below. Following the third vibration, the footprints inside the circle accelerated. 3 rapid steps formed in the dusty layer, each one moving closer to the stairwell entrance. I retreated halfway down the staircase while maintaining visual observation. The prints stopped at the edge of the stairwell opening. They did not continue downward. Instead, a new disturbance formed beside them. Long, thin lines appeared across the platform floor as the dusty soil shifted outward into branching shapes identical to the carved symbols on the posts and chamber walls. The pattern expanded rapidly across the entire platform's surface. When it reached the bases of the posts, each one vibrated briefly as if responding to contact. The cat fled the tower again. I heard it exit across the ridge. At 10:27, the pattern reached the stairwell threshold. The dusty lines continued descending the steps toward me. While observing their progress, I noticed a final structural anomaly above. The lantern frame mounted over the platform had begun swaying. There is no wind sufficient to cause this movement. The iron pulley chain attached to the frame lowered slowly toward the center of the circle, as if something unseen had just taken hold of it and was beginning to climb down. Log entry 29. Arthur Fisher Emergency Structural Observation. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 1031. The branching dusty patterns reach the step directly above my position in the stairwell. Movement rate has slowed but continues steadily downward. The soil does not fall through the cracks of the wooden stairs as expected. Instead, it spreads across the surface like a thin living layer. I relocated to level 2 to maintain distance while continuing observation. From this position, I can still hear the iron pulley chain above. The sound is consistent. Metal links sliding under tension, followed by a faint creak from the lantern frame mount. Estimated load on the system appears significant. At 10:33, the chain stopped moving. A second later, the tower roof emitted a sharp impact. Not falling debris. Something landing. Weight distribution across the upper beams caused the entire structure to shift slightly eastward before stabilizing. Several dusty particles fell through the stairwell in response to the vibration. Immediately after the impact, new footprints formed on level 4. I cannot see them directly from here, but their presence is confirmed through sound. Slow compression of soil, then wood creaking beneath pressure. The steps began moving toward the stairwell opening. I heard the first step descend. Wood underload produced a low groan followed by the brief cracking noise of dusty soil compressing against the step surface. Then another step. The pattern matches the elongated prints previously documented. Step length irregular, height distribution inconsistent. It moves carefully, adjusting its weight with each descent. At 10:35, the descending steps reached level 3. I heard the interior chamber soil shift violently for several seconds as if disturbed by sudden movement passing the doorway. Then silence. I approached the level 3 landing cautiously to verify the condition. The chamber door is now fully open. The packed earth inside shows deep disturbances where numerous long footprints have crossed and recrossed the surface. The circular pattern carved into the ground has partially collapsed, but the depressions that once marked 23 positions remain visible. Only one of them is freshly disturbed. The one closest to the doorway. At 10:36, the descending steps resumed. They are now on the staircase between level 3 and level 2. Distance between us approximately 8 steps. No visible subject present, only dusty impressions appearing one after another. While retreating backward into the watchman quarters, I observed the final entry written in the notebook. I had not previously turned the last page. The text reads, "When the circle breaks, it chooses the next watchman." As I finished reading, another footprint formed directly outside the doorway of the quarters. It stopped there, waiting. Then something tall enough to brush the ceiling beams exhaled slowly into the room. Log entry 30. Arthur Fisher Behavioral Observation. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 1039. The footprint outside the watchman quarters remains stationary. Depth indicates sustained pressure rather than momentary contact. The air inside the room has changed. Temperature dropped approximately 4 degrees based on the portable sensor attached to my equipment case. Simultaneously, the dusty particles in the room have begun drifting slowly toward the doorway, drawn outward as if by controlled airflow. The breathing continues. Each inhale pulls loose dust from the floorboards toward the threshold. Each exhale sends it spreading across the room in thin branching patterns identical to the symbols documented earlier. It is writing. The dusty lines form gradually across the wooden boards. Branching shapes intersecting and repeating, spreading outward like roots. At 10:41, I moved sideways along the wall to maintain distance from the doorway while documenting the pattern formation. The footprint outside the door adjusted position. The soil compressed again slightly closer to the threshold. Still, no visible form. But the height of the exhale now reaches the upper beams of the room. Whatever stands there occupies most of the vertical space. At 10:42, a new sound occurred behind the tower, soft scratching. The cat has returned. Through the cracked window frame, I observed it standing on the ridge outside, staring upward at the tower roof. Its posture is rigid but focused, not fearful as before. It began producing short, repeated calls, 3 in sequence. Pause. Then 3 again. The sound carried through the broken boards of the structure. Immediately, the breathing outside the doorway stopped. Total silence lasted several seconds. Then the footprint shifted backward. A second footprint appeared beside it in the dusty stairwell. Both impressions turned slightly toward the upper staircase. The cat repeated the pattern again from outside. 3 calls, 3 calls, 3 calls. The unseen presence reacted again. The footprints began ascending the stairs. 1 step, then another. The wood groaned under weight as it moved back toward level 3. I followed carefully behind to observe. When I reached the landing, the chamber floor had begun collapsing inward, soil sinking into a deeper hollow beneath the tower foundation. Footprints crossed the earth toward the center of the carved circle, then stopped. The cat's final call echoed from outside. At that moment, the displaced posts on level 4 began sliding again above us. All of them grinding slowly across the platform floor, reforming the circle, but leaving the stairwell opening directly inside its boundary. Log entry 31. Arthur Fisher Containment Reformation Attempt. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 1047. The movement of the posts above continues. Grinding friction from the platform floor produces a steady vibration through the tower frame. Based on the direction of sound, the posts are repositioning into a wider circle than previously observed. The stairwell opening now lies within that circle. Its boundary. This was not the original configuration. At 10:48, the footprints inside the soil chamber shifted again. 2 elongated impressions moved slowly toward the center of the carved ground circle. Each step compressed the earth deeply, causing loose soil to slide into the depression beneath the tower foundation. Structural stability of the entire ridge platform is now uncertain. I remained on level 3 to maintain observation. The breathing resumed, not near the stairwell. Directly above me on level 4, air pressure moved downward through the spiral opening with each exhale. Dust lifted from the chamber floor and spiraled upward into the staircase shaft. The presence has moved back inside the circle. The cat continued calling from outside the tower. 3 short sounds. Pause. 3 again. This pattern appears to influence the entity Huss movement behavior. At 10:50, I ascended carefully to confirm the position. Level 4 platform condition has changed significantly. All 22 posts have completed their repositioning. The circle is now centered around the stairwell opening itself. Each post leans slightly inward again, forming a tight perimeter around the descending staircase. The dusty surface between them is heavily disturbed. Deep elongated footprints stand in the center of the circle, facing downward into the stairwell. While documenting the configuration, the lantern frame chain above me began swaying again. This time the motion was irregular, as if the weight holding it had shifted its grip. A faint scraping followed across the platform floor. 1 step closer to the stairwell, then another. The footprint appeared directly at the edge of the opening beside my boot. Depth significantly greater than previous impressions. The presence was leaning forward, looking down. At 10:52, the cat's ears call suddenly stopped. Total silence returned to the ridge. Immediately, the posts surrounding the circle vibrated violently. Several began cracking where they met the floorboards. Without the external interruption from the cat, the presence stepped fully onto the stairwell edge. A second footprint formed opposite the first, balanced over the opening directly above me. Then dust from the platform rained downward as something extremely tall began lowering itself into the spiral staircase. Log entry 32. Arthur Fisher final structural record. Northern Ridge Maintenance Site 1055. The descent has begun. The dusty particles falling through the stairwell confirm the presence is lowering itself slowly into the spiral shaft. Each contact point produces a deep compression in the wooden steps, visible as elongated footprints forming one level above the other. Estimated height exceeds the full vertical span between levels 3 and 4. Movement pattern controlled deliberate. One step forms, pause. Another step forms lower. The breathing is now inside the tower. Air pressure pushes outward through the stairwell, carrying the odor of damp soil and decayed timber through every floor. The chamber on level 3 continues collapsing inward, soil sliding into the hollow beneath the foundation. The circle above is failing. At 10:57, I retreated to level 2 to document the final structural changes. The Watchman notebook remains open on the desk. Dust lines from the earlier branching patterns now extend across the page margins, forming shapes identical to the carvings on the posts, roots spreading through written words. While recording this observation, a footprint formed on the step directly outside the quarter's doorway. Then another. The presence has reached level 2. Ceiling beams in the room vibrated lightly as the weight shifted forward. Though nothing is visible, the height of the exhale reaches the upper boards again, confirming the same vertical scale previously noted at the doorway. I stepped backward until the desk stopped my movement. At 10:58, the cat returned. It appeared suddenly in the doorway behind the unseen presence. I do not know how it re-entered the tower. The animal did not hiss or flee. Instead, it walked calmly across the dusty floor toward the stairwell. The breathing paused. The footprint outside the doorway shifted slightly, as if attention had moved. The cat stopped beside the open notebook. It looked at the final entry. Then it produced the call again. 3 short sounds. Pause 3 more. The tower responded immediately. Above us, the remaining posts on level 4 cracked one after another. The circle collapsed inward, dropping timber and soil through the platform opening. Dust poured down the staircase in thick clouds. The breathing turned violent. The elongated footprints staggered across the floor, retreating toward the stairwell. Another collapse followed beneath level 3 as the soil chamber gave way entirely. By 11:01, the tower stabilized again. Silence returned. The dusty floor shows only my own boot prints. No elongated impressions remain. The cat is gone. However, while closing the notebook, I discovered a new line beneath the Watchman's final entry. The handwriting is not mine. It reads, Day 1.